This is Joseph and welcome to my podcast, Iniskwela. Sa podcast na ito, you will hear me talking about anything that grabs my attention na may kinalaman sa mga Kristiyanong Pinoy ngayon and the broader culture that they inhabit. Tara, maghuntahan tayo. Hello mga kahuntahan, we are now on our 10th episode for Iniskwela, and for this week's huntahan, we will take a break from our series on the social utility of the Ten Commandments. I-resume natin iyon sa susunod na episode, but we will have a special episode this week. I intend to discuss my philosophical observations tungkol dito sa latest MCU TV show na Loki in its first season na matapos na mapanood ko na yung final episode just last week. So I would try to flesh out my philosophical observations about the season, and I will then attempt to make predictions about the future of the MCU films and TV shows and why I think Christians must exercise thoughtfulness sa panonood ng mga ganitong uri na produkto ng ating pop culture. Ngayon, sa inyo na interested on discussions on the surface of Loki's storytelling, siguro gusto niyong pag-usapan yung mga comic book plots at yung mga comic book tropes and characters, Easter eggs, stuff that you would usually find on other reviews. Well, you will be disappointed about this episode because this is not what this episode is about. That's not what I'm going to do. I am of course a pastor and a servant for the church, and bahagi ng gawain na yan, I think that it includes the task of being a sort of an ethnographer of the present culture para sa layunin ng pag-equip sa mga mananampalataya in engaging these cultural products. And that's what I hope to do, the best that I am able to. And what I will do in the case of Loki is to analyze its subtle messaging on the level of its philosophy as much as I understand it. So saan tayo magsisimula? I want to begin with the end. At yun yung pinakahuling episode because I think that it holds the key to actually interpreting the whole season, the whole first season of Loki. And obviously, there are spoilers ahead. So kung di mo pa napapanood yung Loki at plano mo itong tapusin, well, tapusin mo muna yung buong season and then you can come back here and panoorin mo ulit itong video na to. But we will begin with the last episode because I believe that the key moment of revelation is here. You can find it here in this last episode. In Loki's last episode, you have that scene where Kang, or also known as He Who Remains, si Kang ay nagkaroon ng sort of exposition na kanyang i-deliver doon sa dalawang protagonist natin all throughout the season, and that is Loki and his female version, Sylvie. Si Loki and Sylvie, pinuntahan nila itong si Kang, and Kang gave an exposition. Now, I believe that this exposition is also what holds the key to unlocking the series' philosophy of history. Yung filosofiya ng kasaysayan na pundasyon ng season na ito ng Loki and perhaps even of the MCU, yan ay matatagpuan natin doon sa mga salita nitong si Kang, or He Who Remains. Si Kang, you would note that he spoke of one cataclysmic event that happened in the 31st century, kung saan ikwento niya na there was that scientific discovery that was discovered by a version of him. And his scientific discovery was that there are actually more universes that sit on top of our own. So there exists not only one universe, but there are actually multiple universes. Pwede natin itong tawagin na the multiversal revolution. There was this great event that is called the multiversal revolution. And you would note that the way it was explained by Kang was that it happened like some sort of an siguro mako-compare natin ito sa actual revolution sa pag-aaral ng kasaysayan. The actual revolution is a coined term sa isang pivotal age in antiquity kung saan so suddenly new ways of thinking, a more progressive way of thinking emerged in various places of the globe in antiquity, and they have striking parallel developments although wala naman silang clear connection. Now in Loki's world, ito yung nangyari sa multiversal revolution. This kind of revolution happened as similar scientific discoveries were occurring separately in various spheres of the multiverse, in various universes, in various locations of the multiverse. At sabi ni Kang, other versions of him in other universes were coming to that same discovery. That discovery that, as I have said, there are actually more universes than one. Now, what happened as a result of that discovery was the improvement of the state of life of each universe. Kasi nagkaroon ng great scientific and technological advance as universes share their technology and what they know about nature, about the universe. They share it together, and it led to the improvement of the quality of life of each of the universe. So there was a massive expansion of what we know in a multiversal scale, and there was that, therefore, the ability now to interacts with reality in a way that would produce technology that could serve the good of the citizens of each universe. Now, this story resonates with us. Bakit? Because I believe that the elements of this story are actually drawing from the social imaginary of the Enlightenment age, o yung tinatawag na modern age or modernism. And we know that the Enlightenment age is an age that is filled with promises for humanity, because there is now that great expansion of scientific knowledge, as well as the utilization of that to produce technology in order to improve our lives. So that was the promise of modernism, and we know that it was birthed by the preceding revolution, the scientific revolution, coupled with the Renaissance. After a series of scientific discoveries na nangyari, we know that or we are told that what happened was that there was a liberation of humanity from the grips of superstitious but ignorant way of knowing. So that was the interpretation of many people about the scientific revolution. Nalaman natin that we are not actually at the center of our own solar system. So nagkaroon tayo ng knowledge kung paano umiikot yung ating planeta around the Earth, and many things in relation to that. And therefore, the Enlightenment or the modernist dream was one of progress. As human knowledge expand, ang nangyayari is we are now able to propel our history towards technological progress that would improve the quality of our lives. So, yan yung pangako. We know now how the universe works, and we now have the ability, therefore, to manipulate nature for our own ends, for our own purposes. And as human cultures share this common value, this scientific value, this technological value, and this humanistic value, we can now aspire to a shared telos, a shared universal human value, a sort of meta-narrative. Pag sinabi nating meta-narrative, it is a wide-scale accounting of the meaning of history. And now, in the Enlightenment dream, the meaning of history is to propel mankind towards progress that would improve the quality of our living, perhaps would reduce our suffering, and would maximize our enjoyment in life. And that is the promise of humanism. In humanism, we improve each other's life. And we kill diseases, we make life easier, and we congratulate each other for our achievements. Exactly how Kang explains the multiversal revolution. Now, it sounded bright and beautiful, and there is a great future ahead of us. But what is the problem with this? Balikan natin yung exposition ni Kang. Sa exposition ni Kang, he gave us the events that actually succeeded the multiversal revolution, and it was not very bright. Sabi ni Kang, however, not every version of me was so pure of heart. So there was the introduction of human evil at the equation. Doon sa idea that we are now headed to progress because we can expand our knowledge. We can now produce more technology. But then entered the problem of human evil. The problem of human evil comes in and frustrates the Enlightenment or the modernist dream, to put it in our terms. Ganyan yung nangyari sa multiversal revolution. Sabi ni Kang sa kanyang exposition, to some of us, new worlds meant only one thing: new lands to be conquered. The peace between realities erupted into all-out war, each variant fighting to preserve and annihilate the others. This was almost the end, ladies and gentlemen, of everything and everyone. So what happened was that some universes, or perhaps some group of people coming from some universes, actually wanted to rule other lands or other universes in the multiverse, and they wanted to impose their own, perhaps let's say, culture, their own meta-narrative, believing perhaps that those meta-narratives are superior to other universes in the multiverse. Now, I believe that this is also seeking to make a parallel in the real world, in our world, so that it resonates. But it is hard to pinpoint exactly the reference of this in terms of that precise historical parallel in the actual world. Although, in my opinion, it could actually refer to perhaps two possible reference. It could refer to the period of colonialism, and you have that in Kang's word that it meant for some of us new lands to be conquered, meaning new places in order to impose our culture upon the culture of another. That is colonialism, which was, we know, partly driven by the conflicts of meta-narratives, yung same Enlightenment dream of expanding knowledge, the same Enlightenment dream of progress, being paired with particular religious narratives. So what happened was a race towards lands to conquer by those who think that their culture is superior, is supreme over other cultures. So this was the immediate effects of globalization during the period of colonialism. There was the competition over conquering lands in order to advance a certain culture's meta-narrative because of some perceived superiority. So I think that it could refer to that. Another reference, which is more giving us the another reference which I think would pinpoint more the problem of human evil is the reference to the series of world wars in our recent history. The World War I, the Second World War, and then what followed after that, of course, was the Cold War between US and Russia that literally almost threatened the perpetuation of humanity because the parties involved were racing towards progress in advanced weapons of mass destruction. So that is what happened. So that is why you have in the statement of Kang that that the multiversal revolution erupted into all-out war, and therefore it was almost the end of everything and everyone. And I say that it is perhaps a reasonable reference because of the disillusionment that the world wars brought to many people. That it was then that they understood that the dream of modernism is not really that plausible because of the problem of human evil. Now, my suggestion is that the reference is actually to both of these historical parallels, yung colonialism as well as this series of world wars in the 20th century. Kasi sa post-colonial ideologies of postmodernism, hindi naman talaga ito magkahiwalay. Both are motivated in advancing a certain meta-narrative because of some cultures' perceived superiority over other cultures, or so what is the claims of post-colonial ideologies. So but the point is that the demonstration of the succeeding history after the multiversal war, after the multiversal revolution, rather, its version of the scientific revolution and the promises of the Enlightenment, there was a multiversal war that speaks of our capacity for evil, our capacity for power seeking, and it actually represents the wars that we recently had in the 20th century, rather, and it placed mankind disillusioned about the promises of modernity. We had been made aware of the malevolence that we are capable of as humanity, and how the expansion of knowledge and the progress of our technology are not tools that can only promote the well-being of mankind. It can also bring us to no less than the human annihilation. And that is the point that Kang is putting forward in his exposition towards Loki and Sylvie. So this is the world we live in now. Ito yung tinatawag na postmodernism, at yan yung pinpoint ng exposition ni Kang, because we are living in a world that is partly characterized by disillusionment. That is our age. There is that disillusion with the modernist promise, as well as skepticism and suspicion over any claim to superior meta-narratives, superior culture that may actually bring us to another catastrophic war of human cultures. So that is what is at the heart of postmodernism. But we know also that the modernist approach hasn't been abdicated. It is still in the marketplace of ideas, kaya yung messaging ni Loki is an attempt to join the cultural dialogue, and the question is, what's the proper solution? Now sa Loki, with Kang, with He Who Remains, this is given a particular solution that I believe is seeking to parallel with the Christian solution, or perhaps the American or the Western Christian solution. And that is the solution of Kang. So you have Kang, the timekeepers, and the TVA. Doon sa exposition niya, as he continued on in episode 6, there is what he called dogma. So it was actually Sylvie who opened it up. So sabi ni Sylvie, and the timekeepers came to save us. And Kang answered that with a song, Amen. So that means it is religious. It is to be viewed as the religious solution. But he cut off that exposition and he spoke of diverging from the dogma. Meaning that is the dogma, but that dogma is not true. That dogma is based on a lie. Now, bakit siya based on a lie? Well, mamaya natin tignan yon. Let's skip that for a moment because actually we need to understand what the dogma is. It is the dogma of the timekeepers and the TVA. It is a religious dogma, in the words of Kang himself. The succeeding statement of Kang was an exposition of the truth behind the dogma. But let's consider what the dogma actually is. And it is, in fact, what is presented in the whole season, beginning with episode 1 and the revelations that succeeded that episode. So we learned that TVA is actually a sort of multiversal religious organization na ang kanilang mission is to protect a meta-narrative. Now I'm using my term, my terminology na ginagamit ko mula kanina, the meta-narrative, but in the series it is called the sacred timeline. There is the sacred timeline that must be preserved. And this sacred timeline, this meta-narrative is drawing from the revelation of a Trinity-like character. Triune beings who are aliens, yes, but they are treated as divine characters. So it doesn't matter that they are aliens; they are intended to represent God in the same way that the Nordic gods are represented in the MCU as divine, as aliens. This mythology are aliens. So the so-called timekeepers are actually giving the revelation of that justifies this sacred timeline. Now, TVA is then the agency of the timekeepers. Sila yung nagkikip ng order sa multiverse by protecting a single timeline. And and how they protect that single timeline is they oppress other multiversal timelines, multiversal expressions that would lead to what they think a potential chaos, that would lead to another all-out war of the multiverse. Now, the members of the TVA believes that they are created for this sole purpose. And notice that they are created by the timekeepers. And therefore, they are bound to that created order and purpose. Let me ask you, what do you think it looks like? It looks exactly what it is intending to parallel in the real world. It is the Christian church. It is the Christian idea with its belief in the triune God and the created order that is rooted in the triune God, as well as a mission to perpetuate the Christian meta-narrative which faithful Christians believe to be the truth that excludes all other claims to meta-narratives. Now, the whole series is a criticism of this, perhaps in their mind, fundamentalist, dogmatic Christian solution represented by the TVA. Unang-una, pinapakita nung series that the main issue here is freedom. The Christian solution has secured order, yes, it has secured stifling order. at the expense of free expression, at the expense of freedom. And therefore, the series is replete with hints of these issues of the oppression of freedom, issues of freedom of expressing one's identity. And of course, the best way to show that, to demonstrate that, is to allude to the issues relating the LGBTQ plus movement or community. Ipinapakita doon na yung narrative ng TVA is one of excessive order, and it cannot allow for any deviating variants who does not fit within their categories in terms of the sacred timeline, and therefore it leads to the pruning of innocent timelines, as Sylvie observed. Makikita mo yan all throughout the series. All the Lokis represent this identity spectrum, whether in relation to gender, and that is the most pronounced, but we can extend that to other expressions of identity that is deemed to be oppressed by the moral order in Christian thought. It was announced early on that Loki actually was gender fluid, and makikita mo yan doon sa credits, sa post-credit, doon sa profile ni Loki, there was the fluid under the category of sex. And it actually makes sense because his power is shape-shifting, and shape-shifting is a recognized gender variant among queer theories. And so makikita mo na they played with it, with the gender theme. That's why when you came with the with what is being anticipated in the earlier parts of the season, and that is who is the other Loki variants, you would expect that it would also be a male character. But to your surprise, the other Loki variant was actually a female. And that is telling us that Loki doesn't really fit the normal gender expectation, because Lokis represent the spectrum of identity. And then another hint of that is Sylvie's Nexus event. This also brings to mind another LGBTQ related issue, and it is what toys should children play with. So you have Sylvie playing with toys that's usually masculine, warrior toys, and you have Sylvie playing particularly with the Valkyrie toy, which is in Marvel Comics is actually a lesbian character. So there is that introduction of another LGBTQ theme. And also in an episode of this season, there was a going out scene wherein a conversation sa pagitan ni Loki at ni Sylvie. Loki actually admitted to Sylvie that he actually is a little bit of both, referring to Sylvie's question whether his romantic engagements was with princesses or princes. So it was that gender theme. Now, the two Lokis, the Loki and Sylvie, then eventually formed a twisted romantic relationship. Now, the twisted romantic adjectives is actually adjectives that were given by Mobius. So there was the bringing out of how apparently this love thingy is twisted and romantic. That is also what Kang said by the last episode, that it was something unnatural, he said. So there was the bringing out of this theme of love that appears to be twisted, that appears to be unnatural, and of course they are the same person. And this love, when it was developing, produced a massive deviation from the sacred timeline. This isn't supposed to happen according to the timekeepers, according to the TVA. This is a deviation of the sacred timeline, and it is one of a massive deviation. So I think it was in either episode 3 or episode 4 kung saan as Loki and Sylvie were forming a connection, perhaps falling in love, that the sacred timeline branched out nagkaroon ng malaking pag-deviate doon sa sacred timeline na nagkaroon ng another timeline, and perhaps it is an allusion to another LGBTQ rhetoric of love wins against oppressive universal forces, well, in the case of Loki, multiversal forces. So that is the criticism. The TVA solution is one that is that oppresses freedom, and it is intending to parallel with the Christian solution. And the second criticism is that these are all based on grand deception. These things are not true. The timekeepers are not real. And you have that in the beheading of the timekeeper, proving that they were only creations. This is but myth. This is lies. The Minutemen therefore are not truly created, but also, as Sylvie was trying to point out, they were also just variants. They also are as free from this oppressive moral order, and they are just recruited for this mission based on deception. So that is intended to parallel with the Christian faith. There is no Trinity. That is what is being presented here. There is no God. Christians are as queered, as chaotic, and they only embraced a uniformizing religious ideology based on a grand religious deception. As Kang revealed in the end, pinakita niya na ang nasa likod talaga ng creation ng timekeeper and TVA mythos was not the truth of the timekeeper. And this is where we deviate from the dogma. Sabi niya, when he was about to tell the truth, nandoon yung Goliath, which he found and used to weaponize in order to perpetuate this lie. The Goliath was the beast in charge of the void, in charge of nothingness, of annihilation. And I think that this is intended to refer to the fear of annihilation, to the pull of nihilism. If there is no TVA, if there is no timekeeper, then there is Goliath. And if you would note, when Loki landed on the void, as ang sinabi niya, am I in hell? So it is the fear of annihilation, of nihilism, of nothingness, of lack of purpose. It is that fear being weaponized in order to justify the perpetuation of the Christian meta-narrative. That is the intended parallel, in my opinion. Now, what is the seasons honest about is the strength of Kang's methodology, because his methodology was in fact justified even in the exposition of Kang, in that there appears to be no better alternative in order to secure order and peace and harmony. So in the series view, what justifies Kang was that tyrannical control is the solution for harmony and peace, so that we do not end up with chaos and destruction. Kaya sabi ni Kang in his continuation of his exposition, stifling order or cataclysmic chaos. And this was already philosophically prominent even in the earlier dialogues of the character in the series, there was a discussion on order and chaos in the case of Loki and Mobius in an earlier episode, as well as with Sylvie and B15 also in an earlier episode. So the philosophical discussion here is really about chaos and order. Are we willing to sacrifice our freedom under a tyrannical order, or should we be free, but we are risking ending up to chaos and even Goliath, even annihilation? Kaya sabi nga ni Kang, you may hate the dictator, but something far worse is gonna fill that void if you depose him. So there is that fear factor again. There is that threatening again. Either you have God or you have nihilism, moral nihilism, or purpose nihilism in terms of human purpose. You kill the dictator, Kang said. What fills the void? This is the classic Nietzschean diagnosis na inexpress ni Nietzsche sa kanyang parable of the madman. God is dead. What then? Blood will be shed. There is the pool of nihilism. What fills the void? So the source of moral order is now gone. Therefore, we carry the divine load. What are we going to do? Nietzsche said we need to become supermen, Ubermensch. We need to become heroes. And that, I believe, is how this Loki series is viewing the future of the MCU. Perhaps the future of MCU is kind of an offering of a progressivist, non-Christian solution to the moral dilemma that's facing this 21st century world. Kaya I am expecting that the shape of the MCU in the future is going to be highly political. It will take a more political MCU in the future, and in fact, it's already the shape that's being taken. One of Loki's producers said that more LGBTQ stories are going to be told after Loki. And you have that even in the last installments of the MCU with Black Widow, which is a clear anti-patriarchal messaging, feminism very prominent in that film. And you have Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which was also highly political and a critique of America, perhaps a critique of white Captain America. And what's next? Perhaps more of such kind of products from the MCU. And this is the alternative heroism in place of Christian heroism. And that is what I'm going, and that is what's the future of the MCU as it appears to me. So why be concerned? Well, the reason why I think we should be concerned is because stories shape our worldview. Stories shape our worldview from the level of the unconscious, because stories facilitate learning, implicit learning. Kaya kailangan na maging aware tayo as much as we can, as much as we are able about the messaging of the pop cultural products that we consume. Especially those that exist in narrative format. Kasi ito yung mga pinaka-effective na tools in order to shape our affections, our sentiments, our emotions, and usually in a way that effectively bypass intellectual persuasion. Why? Because we are creatures who are shaped most by stories. At bilang mga Kristiyano, it must not come as a surprise, really. Kasi ang Biblia mismo, we know, contains a lot of stories that are intended to be transformative, that are intended to structure our view of the world. And aside from that, we also know that the whole Bible itself contains a meta-narrative, a meta story, the story of redemption centered in the Lord Jesus Christ, within which we are called to live out, to live our lives as part, to live our lives within that story, because that story is the true story of the world, and we believe in the transformative power of stories. Siguro para bigyan niya ng halimbawa, pag nanonood kayo ng isang pelikula, and the creators, the producers of that film have a clear allegory in his mind. Meron siya talagang iniisip na parallel in the real world, which he or she is intending to present in his or her work of art, pero hindi ka aware dun sa intended parallel niya. You are placing yourself in a place where your perspective can easily be shaped by the story it presents. For example, the story paints a particular disposition, a particular perspective as a villainy perspective. So merong pinipresent na villain which who you are supposed to hate and to be angry about and to disagree with, and it forms those kinds of emotions in your heart. So the narrative is evoking anger in your heart against this villain dahil sa kanyang perspective, dahil sa kanyang actions. That person is being painted as a villain in the story. Now, when you find the intended parallel in the real world, it would be hard to shake off the sentiments that was already created in there because of the power of the story that you watched. So, ganyan yung maaring mangyari sa Loki. The Timekeepers, the TVA is presented to be this fundamentalist, closed, narrow-minded, a tyrannical group of people that oppresses freedom, and you find that it in the real world it looks like Christianity with its attempts to propagate the Christian message of a God who has created all things and has established a moral order for creatures. So there is that parallel, and you may carry the sentiments in the real world. So that is one reason. Another reason is because pop cultural products, especially today, are deliberately agenda driven, and they are anti-Christian agenda driven. Isa ito sa mga major shifts ng ating panahon, lalong-lalo na nung yung mga students ni Herbert Marcuse, who was a prominent member of the Frankfurt School of Thought. Yung kanyang mga students, yung ng kanyang School of Thought, saw to it to propagate his views by using their artistic creations as a tool for social activism. Si Herbert Marcuse, of course, was at the core Marxist, someone who views a society as divided in binary categories of oppressed and oppressor, and therefore that is the intention and the idea of Marcuse. What happened was that the awakening of the proletariat consciousness did not come as promised by Karl Marx when capitalism collapsed during the Great Depression. Kaya sinasabi niya yung awakening, it must come by means of arts. Ibig sabihin, we must awaken the people. It's not going to come automatically. So from here on, pop cultural products are seen as a means in order to awaken people to the great power relations in society, to the great oppressor-oppressed relationships in society. And this is the starting point of woke culture. There is the awakening, and it pervades pop cultural creations. So there is the deconditioning. Now, this is not an argument for abstinence. Hindi ko sinasabi na we should not watch these pop cultural products. Hindi ko rin sinasabi na we should not enjoy them. I quite enjoyed Loki, but I am arguing for the ability to discern so that we may be able to engage these cultural products intelligently and to exercise dialogue and even to offer counterculture. As Christians, we are commanded not to let the world squeeze us into its own mold. And it's trying to do that at every corner of our culture. And so we must exercise resistance and counterculture. And that is the point of this episode. So thank you for listening. If you like this content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. If you haven't yet, you can also listen to our podcast episodes weekly on Spotify. Salamat mga kautang.